Good evening, Santa Cruz. Welcome to a very special show of Voices from the Village. I'm your host, Sandino Gomez, last I checked, and it is August 23rd, 2015. I hope you're having a wonderful, kind of a warm August day out there. So if you are watching today, August 23rd, feel free to call in a little later on when we get to that point so you can join the conversation on tonight's topic, which is going to be all about Cuba and the United States. It's not over, folks. What's next? There's a lot of talk. Okay, the embassies are opening. This is great stuff, but there's a lot of backstory to this and a lot of, how shall we say, complicated politics that really need a little bit of unpacking and a little bit of discussing and understanding to kind of create what I think would be a decent understanding of Cuba, especially for folks that haven't been there, because I think one of the problems with the kind of traditional mainstream media narrative of Cuba is I would argue, not always represented super well. So it's nice to be able to talk about those things on this program, Voices from the Village, with a panel of people who have all been to Cuba. I'm really proud to sit here tonight with a bunch of folks, self-identified activists, students, community organizers, and a lot of different great folks here to talk about their experiences with Cuba and kind of what's going on today. So I'm going to start across the table from me. We have my friend Leonie Sherman, who in 2006 biked across Cuba.
Now, there's two ways to bike across Cuba, of course. In like a hard day, you can bike from north to south, but that's not what I did.
No, not the easy way, shall we say.
I spent about 6 weeks at it.
Wow.
We took a bus to Santiago and biked all the way to the other end of the island in Pinar del Rio. So we went slowly. It was July, probably not the best time to bike across Cuba. It's a little bit hot. We were really interested to see stuff that was sort of off the beaten path or not sanctioned by any government. We were just interested to see what life was like on the ground in Cuba. So met a wide variety of people, stayed with a lot of different people in big cities and tiny towns, and had a fascinating time of it.
Yeah, heard from a lot of friends actually that your recent presentation with all the photos was excellent, so I'm really bummed I missed that.
It's a really picturesque place.
Well,
very
hopefully
photogenic.
we can. Oh my gosh, yes it is.
Do another one.
Yeah, maybe we could get that scheduled for another time or something. But we can look at some of your photos a little later on. But we'll continue on with introductions. To Leonie's left is Marissa Ramirez. She's a Cabrillo College student at the moment, working on her prerequisites because she's looking to become a medical school student at some point. And if I understand correctly, you're considering Las Escuelas Latinoaméricas de Medicinas, aka Cuba's amazing free medical school, bringing students from all around the world to get top quality medical training in Cuba and then going home to their own communities. Is that all correct?
Claro. I'd definitely say that's super true. And that's what inspired me to go to Cuba, to explore outside of my comfort zone and really explore what Cuba was about and this really huge gift that they're offering the entire world. This is something that's offered on a global basis, and it's super inspiring to even have a chance to look into that. And schools there, they're top notch. The quality of education for a country that just does not have that many assets to offer, they truly have risen up to the plate and have shown the world that education really has the most value.
Absolutely, yeah. And so you've been to Cuba to check out the place?
I did, just June. It was super.
Just recently?
Yeah.
Oh wow, okay, so very recent, in June.
Yeah, looking at Leonie's pictures was pretty phenomenal because I got to see what Cuba was like 10 years ago and just comparing what that was like from my own experience.
Yeah.
Huge changes happening in Cuba. Right. I can't imagine what's gonna happen in the next 5 years as we all can relate to.
Certainly. I know the revolution will continue, that's for certain. But what it will look like, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Great, well, thank you for joining us tonight, Marissa.
Thank you for having me.
And to Marissa's left, we have Drew Lewis, retired former construction worker, builder, and in 1999, you went with Global Exchange on one of their reality tours, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And I became very enamored with the culture and the people of Cuba, and I started adopting Cuban families right and left.
Wow. Tell us about that.
Well, when I first went in '99, I went on the Global Exchange tour, and I became very close friends with my tour guides that spoke English. My Spanish wasn't that good, and I went to the library one day and to send an email, and I was shocked at the kind of technology they had to send emails was like really just very primitive, very in bad shape. And I realized that in my work I was doing over the hill in Silicon Valley, people were throwing away computers that were far, they were just a couple years old. And so I took it upon myself to take computers at that point and start giving them to the students that I had befriended in the first tour that I was on. And it became highly successful, and I started taking regular suitcase loads of laptops with me. And then that evolved into, I joined an organization called Infomed, which they were shipping 40-foot tractor trailer loads of used computers to Cuba. Wow. So I volunteered my services with Infomed and started helping to facilitate shipping large quantities of computers, basically to put the computers in the hospitals and upgrade the Cuban medical system so that they could access information for the patients on the internet using the used computers to tie into the internet.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I know in my visits, computers that we would consider obsolete were certainly in use all over the place.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's just kind of one of the sad effects of the blockade that Cuba isn't able to, get the latest and greatest in so many different aspects. It's certainly not computers, but really a very punishing blockade, and I gotta commend you. That's very noble, awesome work.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Have you been back a couple times, or?
Yeah, I've been there about 13 times in the last 15 years.
Wow.
And last time was just a month and a half ago.
Also a recent trip then. Yeah.
With me.
Oh, both of y'all. Okay, cool. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about your trip once we finish the introduction.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that would be awesome. 13 times in 15 years, man. I can't. I've been 3, but that's over like almost 10 years, so that's cool. Well, thank you, Drew, for joining us. And moving on to Drew's left, we have Carol Severson. She's a local social justice activist and a longtime supporter of the Pastors for Peace Caravan to Cuba. We've worked together many years, Carol, in this project, and you've had the opportunity to go the past couple years on the caravan, correct?
Right. I went 3 years ago with Pastors of Peace, and I just got back end of July. So we were toured about 12 or 13 days in Cuba. It was awesome.
Wow.
That's all I can say. It was really awesome. Yeah.
Because you were there for the anniversary, or the celebration of the triumph of the revolution, right? The July 26th celebration?
Yeah.
Right. We got to go to a
that's a good
celebration with the CDR, the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution, and it was a great party. It was really a great party.
Yeah. I've been to a few myself. They very much are. Well, I'd love to hear more about the, any highlights from this year's caravan trip for you? We want to hear a little bit more about the project and everything once we finish the intros,
Right.
but
Well,
just any highlights for you just going recently?
Visiting the party with the CDR was a big highlight. And I've known about Cuba since 1968, and I've talked about it, as an activist ever since. So I may not be the most knowledgeable, but I certainly am one of the biggest supporters of Cuba, and think that their revolution should be left alone. They have a right to their sovereignty, and the U.S. should end its whole idea about regime change. Other than that, yeah. I have a lot to say, so you get me started. And
I'm trying to think of a witty response there. But I was going to say, we'll definitely unpack those politics a little bit. But that's great that you had a good time. And do you know exactly how big the shipment was? I know Pastors for Peace, for those who don't know, does a really amazing kind of unlicensed, unauthorized aid shipment as a form of civil disobedience to break that blockade, to break the travel bans and all that stuff. How did that project go? Was there a big delivery this year?
There were about 50 caravanistas this time, and there was a lot of humanitarian aid, but I had my ankle broken 2 years ago, and I couldn't, you know, I couldn't handle the humanitarian aid that they unpacked and packed again. So, but I saw a lot of wheelchairs, a lot of walkers, you know, that kind of sort of equipment. What I know, one year when I went, they also sent an incubator, and I don't know the big things that they sent this year.
Right.
But there was bicycles, wheelchairs, lot of
Always an amazing.
right, computers.
Well, thank you, Carol. We'll talk a little bit more about
Right.
the kind of your recent trip, just like the rest of these folks. And then speaking of caravanistas and the Pastors for Peace Cuba Caravan, to Carol's left is my dear friend Nancy Abbey, who I have to tell y'all, she's actually the one that got me into Cuba solidarity work, and not that I wasn't already interested in solidarity with a lot of Latin America and kind of exploring how the United States' foreign policy has, shall we say, impeded the sovereignty, to put it nicely, of many, many countries. And it was Nancy Abbey that approached me as kind of representative of the Cuba Caravan Project and pastors, and I was working with the Watsonville Brown Berets at the time, and asked me, well, do you think the Brown Berets might be interested in going to Cuba? And I'm like, well, do fish need water? Like, are you kidding me? I mean, a free trip to Cuba? What? What's the catch? And there was no catch. It really was this amazing group of local activists. Carol was part of that even back then. And they fundraised and helped send myself and some Brown Berets on that first caravan, and then worked to send over, I think, 13 young people over 6 or 7 years of continued collaboration between the Caravan Project and the Watsonville Brown Berets. We were able to send a lot of great young people, besides myself, who were able to go and experience Cuba for themselves and see what a society that actually, you know, looks like when principles of revolution and social justice and equality for all and care for all are actually implemented. You know, these are things that certainly a lot of Brown Berets are concerned about, have worked towards, have organized for, but to be able to take a peek into a unique revolutionary society like Cuba was always such a blessing. And Nancy, I just got to say, thank you.
You are very welcome.
Yeah.
That was one of the smartest things we did.
I bet.
Before that, we had other young people go. But the thing that was particularly wonderful about sending the Brown Berets was that they didn't go to Cuba and compare it to the United States. They went to Cuba and saw it within the context of other countries that
Besides the
didn't
United
have the industrial capacity that we have and the economic level. So they came back, I think, with a whole different kind of picture. I remember, and I can't remember his name, but one of the Brown Berets came back saying, those Cuban kids are so spoiled. They don't realize what they have. You know, they have free education and they're well fed and they're taken care of, and they don't even appreciate it.
Wow.
So they just had a different
Grass is always
context within to look at all of this with.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
Yeah, I know some of the people that went during the project had definitely done international solidarity work in other Latin American countries, and to be able to really compare and contrast the kind of poverty you see in Mexico or Central America versus the kind of poverty that you see in Cuba, just worlds apart. Like there's certainly poverty in both places, but it's a very different kind of poverty. And,
Well, of course, what I have loved, and I've been in this, in a sense, I've been in this work since the revolution. I was raised as a socialist. My parents were very sympathetic to communism. And so when the revolution happened, I was terribly excited. I just thought this was fantastic. So I've been aware and watching this and doing what I could ever since. But so often people go there and they see, oh, these poor people don't have cell phones. They don't have fancy cameras. They don't have iPads. They don't have all these things, you know, and how sad that is, you know, how deprived they are. And, you know, that's because of socialism. And I think, okay, so why don't the people in Haiti have housing, health care? Is that because of capitalism? I mean, people don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind, that Cubans are really, they don't have the grinding poverty
Yeah.
that you see in other non-industrialized countries.
And even here.
And even here, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly large regions of the United States that have a lower infant mortality rate than the country of Cuba, you know. based
They're very
on, like,
rich in
access.
knowledge.
A higher
Higher.
one, you know.
A higher
Yeah,
mortality.
excuse me. Flipping.
Yeah.
Yeah, the United States has a higher infant mortality than Cuba.
Right.
Right.
And a lower
Yeah.
literacy rate.
Right.
Big time. You can get a huge sense of that when you're just talking to anybody in Cuba. That's
Yeah.
one thing I picked up pretty quickly there.
Yeah, I mean, what, little more than 2.5, 3 generations of free education leading to a very literate, very well-educated, extremely knowledgeable society.
Not to mention their television, very educational,
Yes.
with only like 5 channels available, and half of them being like history documentaries. Like,
But great news programs, European news shows. I mean, it's,
And far less commercials. I mean, one thing that
No
really struck me-
commercials.
Yeah, I mean, far less being no in this case. But yeah, one thing that really struck me was even like not only just in the media environment, but even just in the actual physical environment. You know, no bulletin boards. Like you drive like from here to San Francisco on the 101, right? How many giant ads and commercial images are you going to see?
But
yeah.
there's tons of billboards in Cuba.
Well,
They're just revolutionary slogans.
So that's
They're
what I
not
was gonna
ads,
say,
things
yeah.
they want you to buy.
Like breastfeed, breastfeed your baby, that's the kind of billboard.
Save electricity.
Yeah, exactly
I
right.
was really amazed how much TV Cubans watched. Did anyone else notice that? Like I would go into people's houses and there would always be a television on. It was really
Yeah.
stunning. And often, I'm sure you guys saw great stuff, but I would see like Friends and Dawson Creek and telenovelas and a lot of that. People were
all
very...
the telenovelas, yes,
really-
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, brain food. You need a little junk food as well.
Right.
Brain food, you know.
Well, you got freedom of choice there.
Yeah.
Which is odd because I do hear people do try and criticize what that they don't have freedom of press or this or that, and it's kind of really funny coming from people in the United States when the 3 or 4 corporations that own all of our media are doing such a great job of educating the American public and informing viewers around important issues of elections and other important public policy
Like
things,
climate
right?
change.
Well,
Right.
it's been acknowledged that
Good way of putting
that
Yeah.
CIA operatives are actually in the news organizations feeding that's well documented.
Yeah.
So when I
mean,
was in Cuba, there was
yeah.
a particular telenovela that was incredibly popular. It was called Brazil. It's like Dynasty with witches, I
Yeah,
think.
right,
And,
yeah.
and I started watching it, and I was there when Fidel stepped down and his brother took power, and the way they announced that to the nation was that they interrupted the telenovela Brazil, because they knew that everyone in the country was watching it. They could reach everybody all at once. And my Spanish is okay, so this newscaster comes on and they interrupt it, and there's like 16 people around this TV screen this big watching the telenovela, and I'm trying to understand what he's saying, and he's very serious, and he's got this news, this piece of paper with Fidel's signature, and I'm like, did they just say? And then he does it again, and by the 3rd time he says it, I'm like, did they just say Raul is in charge now? And then they went back to the telenovela, and everyone was all, shh, we're gonna miss the telenovela. They didn't want to talk. Like, it was not an event in Cuba that Raul took over for his brother. It was just an unfortunate inconvenience in the telenovela broadcast.
Wow.
It's interesting.
That's pretty accurate.
And that was
yeah.
something else that a lot of people would claim or hear that once Fidel's gone, it's all going to fall apart, and he's all running the show, and it's all Fidel. And then
Yeah.
I
The only
noticed
thing
when
that
I
I
was
saw
there.
that changed was the graffiti. Instead of Viva Fidel, it said Viva Fidel y Raul.
Raul,
People
también, yeah.
spray
They just
painted
added
that on.
y Raul
Yeah.
below. No, certainly, but because it was my first time going in 2006, and that was just before the announcement. There was no signal that anything was going to change or anything like that. And then going back in 2009, 3 years later, right, and then again in 2011, there was an amazing kind of continuity there in a lot of the society. Certainly there were changes, but it wasn't like everything fell apart or all of a sudden,
It was-
without the strong arm. There's this arrogance that assumes, it's all Fidel. It's not like the Cuban people and their skills and their ability to govern themselves.
It was
it's
such
just-
a non-event in Cuba
Right.
that I didn't even realize it was international news until a week later. I went into some town and checked my email, and everyone I knew that knew I was in Cuba was really upset. But in Cuba, it was a non-event. It was really
Well,
You were gonna
because
say, Nancy?
I was going to say because they knew that this is continuity. You know, he was the vice president, so it was just going to continue. And there has always been change in Cuba. From the very beginning.
Very
I mean,
beginning,
they
yeah.
would change policies when they saw that it wasn't working. So change on that level is nothing new to the people of Cuba. I mean, it's there. It's intrinsic in the way they operate.
Yeah. I mean, they always say it's like you know, a revolutionary process, right?
Right.
Like when I was there, at least when we went and visited these different places,
Yeah.
They would always say like the revolution is not over. We did not just win and that's it. It is a continual struggle to improve our situation and that of our comrades and fellow citizens, you know, fellow Cubans. Really, like you say, kind of an ongoing process.
When
Or,
I was in
you know,
Cuba,
continuity,
when
yeah.
I was in Cuba this time, the interpreter would say, they would be talking about some particular issue, and they would say words like this experiment or this project. They wouldn't say, this is it. It was always, this is a project, and implying that the project is ongoing and things change and things, if that doesn't work this way, then we'll change it and we'll do it this. Or the same with the idea of the experiment, that the revolution is a project and is an experiment and is therefore fluid and able to be changed when necessary. And they can do it. And the people know what's going to happen, and through the CDR, through the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution.
Right.
And through the National Assembly of the People's Power.
Yes.
I mean, they have a lot of power in reviewing what's happening and
It's actually
advising.
a very democratic, direct democracy kind of way of
Right.
representation versus our sort of
What we have here.
yeah, what we have here, sort of where the money runs the show. You know, in Cuba, as I understand, all these people are essentially chosen in like a series of committees that just kind of elect representatives and representatives and representatives until the person up the top is really representative of those different constituencies.
It starts
And
out.
it's not financed by
Right.
you know, Pfizer and
Right.
Bechtel and Walmart.
There's
and
no
et cetera,
money.
et cetera, et cetera.
And there's no party either. You don't have to be a communist to run for an office. You start out with an 8.5 piece of paper that gets posted in a community center or someplace with the fact that you want to run for either the National Assembly or the Provincial Assembly, and give your qualifications and what you want to do and so on and so forth. And then, as you say, it gets larger and larger, and people get elected, and half of the people go to the municipal assembly or the provincial assemblies, and the other half comprise half of the National Assembly of the People's Power. And 49%. What I think is interesting is that 51% are representatives from trade unions, craft guilds, the Women's Assembly, I forget what they're called, but those kinds of organizations. And it's a very interesting sort of process that
Where are the
I think is very, well,
Right.
they're in Washington, D.C.
Oh, right. K Street. That's
Yeah,
right. K Street. Great. Well, we're going to get right back to this, but I do want to remind you out there, Santa Cruz, that this is a live program. That is, if you're watching on August 23rd, 2015. Feel free to give us a call. I believe the number's right there below the screen. 831-425-8848, extension 30. I'll pick up the box. We'll talk to you. It's a lot of fun. And or if you have a question for any of our panelists here, please feel free to give us a call in right now, live, August 23rd, 2015. So, hard questions. What's happening in Cuba? What's happening in the United States? Anyone care to update us? I mean, there's been a lot. Don't feel like you got to go everywhere. Everyone can kind of chime in their own piece. But, you know, as we all know, it's changed pretty radically lately. Go!
Well,
Or has
it
it?
has.
Or has it? Ooh, I love it. Controversy. Go!
The fact that we have embassies now in
Yeah.
Cuba, Cuba has an embassy here, it's only that. It's just an embassy. There has been no lifting of the blockade.
Right.
There's no lifting of the travel ban. They haven't given Guantanamo Bay back to Cuba. And regime change is still the order of the day.
That's right.
So we have a lot of work ahead of us still, just like we did before. Certainly taking the U.S. taking Cuba off the terrorist list was a good thing. Well, that terrorist list was generated by the U.S. and no other country in the world. So the fact that, you know, the U.S. has done this is a good thing. And the U.S. acting like this terrorist list is from the UN or from not the United States is, well, we've all been hornswoggled on that one.
Yeah.
I was told that about the amount of tourists coming from the United States to tour Cuba has about doubled because people want to go to Cuba before the U.S. corporations get involved in Cuba and change it. Well, people really should have confidence in the Cuban people and the Cuban legislature that they've spent the last 55 or more years, you know, working their revolution, working their project, their experiment, and they haven't changed it in terms of the most important asset is people, free medical care, free education, nobody goes hungry, nobody's homeless, meaning nobody's homeless. There isn't anybody that doesn't.
Not like a third of Cuba's veterans?
No.
Not,
Yeah.
you know.
No, right.
Yeah,
Right.
you know, just throwing that number out there, as if that happened in any country
Right.
that was industrialized. It happened to be the richest country in the world. Yeah,
Right.
no, certainly.
Right. And that they're going to be very careful allowing the corporations into Cuba of what services and products they need.
Right.
And also that at the very worst, it'll be 51% Cuba, 49% U.S. corporation.
Right.
So there's just no way they're going to allow Taco Bell or
McDonald's.
Kmart or McDonald's into Cuba.
Maybe. It depends what the people decide they want.
Well, that's
Which
true,
I
too.
actually
Yes.
can agree on that. With
Yes.
my experience recently, I was really shocked that there's a lot of American media, including American shows and music,
Right.
and even like products being sold in Cuba. I thought that I'd escaped that when I went there. I'm like, oh, great, a little silence, and that was not the case at all. Like, in fact, the family that I was staying with, they were really in awe of a lot of American media to the point where they have it on their computers, and some Cuban even knew more about artists than I did. That's how out of tune I am. But I feel like seeing the youth actually having lots of cell phones and that growing more and more, there's a natural gravitation in the awe of technology that we have. So you can't fight that nature.
No.
That's going to come in regardless. And I think that comes hand in hand with what America has to offer in technology. And so I think that you do point out something valid, like the government will be able to say yes and no to the things appropriate to keep their culture strong, as
Right.
they have for over 50 years. But at the same time, there's going to be a huge group of people who are going to want what we have. You know, you can't fight that.
Right.
And
Well,
they have a right to it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
But-
that's what they want.
But remember, half the population was, or more than half the population did not live under Batista, the former ruler. So they don't know what it was like. So all they see is the embargo not allowing to have certain things, and they
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
They don't have pencils. You know, they don't have paper. They don't have aspirin. They don't have over-the-counter Tylenol or anything like that for pain reliever. They're working on it, doing their own research around that. But the fact is that they have, because of the embargo, they don't have that kind of stuff. So it has been not just, and the United States then is, you know, waving all these sparklies, you know, look what we have, you can go to Kmart, whatever you, and
Well, it's true because, you know, there's sort of this, as capitalism and industrial development and economic growth happens in China and India, you know, there's like huge concern about how will we find the resources to provide this standard of living, which
Right.
comes mostly from American media kind of generated ideology and whatnot. But how will we provide this for-planet lifestyle for, you know,
Right.
2.5 billion more people?
Right.
So certainly it's not a problem unique to Cuba,
Right.
but that is something that is going on. I mean, the you know, you want what you don't know about. Like curious,
Right,
you're kind of
right.
you want to
Of
learn
course.
more about that media, those devices. Why shouldn't they have iPods and,
Right.
and like
Right.
nice jeans and
Right.
things like that? I mean,
Right.
like Nancy says, to a certain extent, certainly they have a right to, especially considering they've been denied for so long. But it's like,
Yeah.
I love what you're saying also, Carol, in that I do believe in Cubans' ability to kind of distinguish, like, okay, well, this is what we need or versus what we want, and I think they're smart enough to tell the difference.
Right.
I had one of the translators that worked for Pastors for Peace shared a wonderful quote for me, because I'm always like practicing my Spanish, trying to learn, you know, as much as I can, talking with Cubans, and he told me kind of in a moment of candor that, you know, I don't know what's going to happen, you know, as we move forward. I'm not sure, but I'll guarantee you we will never again be the casino whorehouse plantation of, you know, U.S. businesses or the Americas. That will never happen again.
Right.
Yeah, maybe we'll have some McDonald's, but that will never happen again,
Right.
which I can respect.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that we also will be seeing like a huge positive effect that Cuba can bring once they actually have the resources to nurture their medical paradigm there. Like we were visiting the hospitals, and just recently one of the surgeons was explaining how some of the resources were stolen, like the night before, it was broken into and they took some stuff. Like that's just because I see it as not having the money, you know, as a body of people in Cuba to even have like basic necessities. So I'm very intrigued to see what it's going to be like when Cuba does have the resources and technology to take their very strong knowledge and morals and views about the medical paradigm, educational, up to the next level. And also, as you know, the world will see like a really awesome model of what education can bring, you know.
Yeah, to a society, certainly.
Yeah.
Well, just I keep thinking about when I was there. I kept thinking I'm not getting swarmed by mosquitoes. You know, there weren't. They've eradicated mosquitoes because
Right.
mosquitoes
Wow,
bring
wow.
dengue and malaria, right? So that's not happening anymore.
Well, they haven't eradicated them. They have a good program to
Right.
suppress the mosquito
I
population.
got eaten alive on my last night. I had a bite in the bottom of my foot. So like a 24-hour traveling process back home was the worst because I'm walking on this foot. I'm like provoking this little bite.
I don't know if this has changed a lot, but there were a lot of mosquitoes when I was there.
you?
And
Yeah.
maybe in the cities
Countryside?
there aren't that many mosquitoes,
Yeah.
but I
we were-
traveled really widely. And
Yeah, we
I
were-
have one photo of my leg where there's like 25
We-
mosquito
Yeah,
bites
same.
from my
we were
ankle
in
to my
Trinidad
knee.
Christi,
Spiritus.
Santi Cristi. Not a mosquito.
Yeah, those are more, I guess they're more urbanized areas, and
Yeah.
in between,
In
there's
the
a lot of
mountains and-
rural areas
Yes,
in Cuba.
yes, absolutely.
I can
It
attest
is all
that
part
they
of, like,
have
the
not
public health
eradicated
campaign.
the
Right.
mosquitoes.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly reduce in public areas,
Yeah.
but I think it's a stretch to say they've eradicated mosquitoes.
Yeah.
But
They have
a lot of
eradicated
what
malaria,
they have
though.
eradicated is a lot of the diseases
Right.
that mosquitoes
Right.
are
Right.
going to
Yeah.
transfer. And,
Yeah.
I mean, that's not the issue like it would be in certainly in other countries.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I just want to say that the blockade was such a deterrent to their progress.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was keeping them from doing one of the things that we were able to see as caravanistas were the programs that they were trying to do. And sometimes really successfully and sometimes not so successfully, but at least we would see what they were trying to do.
Right.
But you could also see every time the damage that the embargo
Was
had
doing,
done.
yeah.
And a friend of mine who lived there for 3 or 4 years said every morning when she woke up, every day she realized the embargo impacted her life in a negative way. I mean, I don't think we understand sometimes just what a terrible act that was for us to perpetrate on that little island.
Yeah, I'll share a little, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but a Malcolm X quote where he talks about, you know, if you stab me in the back with a knife and you pull that knife out 4 inches, that is not progress.
Yeah.
And if you continue to remove the knife, that is not progress.
Yeah.
You take the knife out, that's still not progress. Progress is when you actually say, hey, I'm sorry, let me bandage that up for you. And that's not at all what's happening in this
Right.
case. I mean, the knife is, a couple inches out, but most of these harmful restrictions are certainly well in place and very much harming people's lives. I mean,
Yeah.
the immense economic toll, the human toll, the countless lives that have been lost because of lack of basic economics. And certainly in the special period, right, after the Soviet Union collapsed, I mean, the human toll of the blockade was so much more. And I couldn't agree with you more, Nancy, about, what if these people were just simply allowed to feed and educate and, give their people health care without all of these restrictions, without these terrorist acts, without these economic blockades,
Right.
without these overt attempts to kill their leaders and dignitaries and sabotage their infrastructure. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's a great quote by George Bush saying, any nation that harbors a terrorist is guilty of terrorism itself, right?
Right.
Well, then can we talk about Luis Posadas Corriles? Can we talk about Orlando Bosch? Can we talk about some of these folks that are admitted, convicted murderers and terrorists that are now walking around free in Miami? I mean, it's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's just taken so out of context,
Right, yeah.
Cuba's the one on the list of terrorist countries sponsoring, right? And here we are making that list. I mean,
The
Well,
basis of this is what the CIA calls the threat of a good example.
yeah.
And that's the
Similar,
same reason why they
right.
did the same thing in Nicaragua. They sent in terrorists and they burned down healthcare centers and schools because they didn't want a small underdeveloped country rising up on its own ability and progressing. They call that a threat of the good example.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what they're applying to Cuba. They don't want Cuba to show the rest of the world that an underdeveloped country can rise up and educate its population, provide health care. That's why they're using terrorists to blow up hotels and Fidel's had 600 assassination attempts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
you
Well
got to
documented, well
keep that in
documented.
context.
Right,
You know?
right.
And I think there's a ramification of the blockade that we aren't even talking about that just occurred to me, and that is that Cuba has had to be in defense constantly in a stance of protecting itself. And for that reason, it has limited the freedom of its people, the freedom of assembly.
Yeah.
It is a country that has had to take measures to suppress political rights. I have this real irritation when people talk about human rights in Cuba, when it's really, they don't have human rights in Cuba. Give me a break, there's food, a human right, and health care and education. Those to me are human
housing.
rights.
Well,
It's the political rights that have been
so it confuses people.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that the blockade is a great part of the major reason for that.
Well, there is
For
actually
the-
a lot of real nasty torture, all kinds of horrible things that happen in Cuba.
Yeah.
In Guantanamo,
Yeah, right.
which
In
is run by
Guantanamo,
the
yeah.
United States.
Right.
And certainly that, let's not say that, Cuba's never done anything wrong. I mean, I think there have been certainly errors, and even to a lot of, Fidel's credit and other Cuban leaders, they've admitted a lot of those mistakes. Like when you ever hear American politicians say, I was wrong about that actually. So, it's kind of pretty big of them to do so. I want to state, let's not minimize, have been problems
right.
and there have been political
Right.
restrictions, but I'd rather have less political rights personally and make sure that I'm not going to starve, my house won't be foreclosed, I will not go bankrupt and become impoverished and live on the streets as a result of my medical debt, which I very nearly did very recently, were it not for amazing employer-provided health care. I would just be ridiculously ridiculous. I wouldn't be sitting here because I'd be working, trying to pay off my medical debt. And that's the kind of thing that just does not happen in Cuba. And
Right.
yeah, you know what? I
Right.
think I'd rather have that than the right to tell them,
No patient is
whatever
ever turned
president
away.
is in office, that I
Right.
think he's an
Ever.
a-hole,
Yeah.
Well,
It's
good-
interesting. I met people in Cuba that said the exact opposite
Opposite?
of that. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a mixed bag. It's not all good, it's not all bad.
Yeah.
The blockade has harmed them, but it's also been a really convenient straw man or boogeyman, and I
Yep.
think Fidel has used it masterfully. He's a really good chess player,
Right.
And
I think that's an exaggeration, but
That was what I experienced there was I saw like a lot of commercials and a lot of attributing stuff that was happening in Cuba directly to the blockade. And my experience was that it seemed like it was a terrible impact. It hurt people, and it was also a convenient political rallying point. And you see that anywhere. That's a really common, political maneuver. But be that as it may, I think it's just a complicated situation in Cuba. It doesn't lend itself easily to generalizations or simplification. For example, one of the things that we take very much for granted in this country that we enjoy is the freedom to travel, and that doesn't really exist in Cuba. You can get in a lot of trouble for leaving your home. And I only say this because I had people come visit me in Havana that I'd met in other places, and they were threatened by friends that I introduced them to directly, and the people said, we're going to report you if you don't, blah, blah, blah.
You were an American.
So, no. The people that had traveled to come visit me, those were the ones that had some ramifications for traveling.
Yeah, because you were an American. They were meeting with you, an American. And Cuban officials don't trust Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Alan Gross.
There is freedom to travel in Cuba?
Well, it's challenging from my understanding. I'm not saying it's impossible, but talking to some of the youth myself, they're explaining the whole process of traveling, especially to America. So I agree strongly at that. If any Cuban even tries to go to the embassy to try to even request that you have to pay, and that you have to pay for like a dozen meetings to even be considered. And it's just a process of, you're going to get denied, so what's the point? But traveling in general is just extremely difficult. So, it's yes and yes for both of you.
I mean, I like to think of it as, if the situation were reversed, right? Let's think about how the United States would act if there were some entity trying to assassinate its leader, destroy its infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just going to speculate. It's really easy to say, oh, this or that, but it is very much about there is an active attempt to overthrow this government, to do all these things. And were that the case?
Coming from the United States.
Coming from the United States. So certainly, I agree, it is a shame that people can't move around, but it's like, and again, it's coming from a privileged position, it's like an understandable defensive tactic when there are people like Alan Grossman going in there setting up these fake Cuban Twitter networks. That was a big scandal, right? Like organizing this fake media network to be subversive, quite frankly. Not in a good way, right? Like subversivism here is great, but being subversive in Cuba means you're like, whatever it means. It's just a different agenda, shall we say, than what I think is kind of being generally promoted.
Because you're mostly focused on survival at this point. So survival is much different than living we are. There's a lot more recreational activities involved in what we do, and that involves traveling too. Yeah. So I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. Freedom of movement, I guess, it comes with a certain sense of security, or it's given when there's a certain sense of security, perhaps by a government, and if that government doesn't have that sense of security, it's not going to give that. There's a long history of collaboration between Cubans going back and forth, Americans being involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's scary. It's scary. So it's easy to say, oh, they don't have these political rights, but we don't have a government official policy trying to destroy our way of life, quote unquote.
Unless you want to go to Cuba.
Well,
then it's illegal.
I'm really curious to just hear maybe a little bit from Drew and Marissa just about your recent trip, kind of who you went with, what you did, things, any highlights for yourselves. I'm really curious just as things have changed so much in the recent, not that they've changed so much, but so much has been happening, shall we say, recently, that I'd love to just get a few minutes if either one of you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, it was a pretty exciting trip. It was my first time really traveling. And
was it licensed or unlicensed?
It was illegal.
Yeah.
Go for it. Be proud.
It was illegal.
Well, that's important. And I respect that.
Yeah, but it was interesting too because no one really questioned us much. Yeah. Because one, I told them that I was going for school, and two, I think that with all these political changes happening, it's like, why are they going to fight? I look harmless, and I am. So
Appearances are deceiving.
You never know.
But
Quiet ones.
it really was a really amazing experience because the schools there were pretty profound. I was stepping onto the campus and went to the Victoria Irom University, which is extremely similar to the University of Elam, and they offer scholarships to people all around the world. So you get to step into the campus and get like a full cultural experience. And I feel like that's what Cuba is all about, just being very diverse and knowledgeable and truly experiencing and engaging with people and connecting. And that was a huge part for me. I was in awe because what I noticed was the social media didn't exist. What was the social media was literally the people there. It's the real thing. So you're walking down the street and I couldn't get down like 4 blocks with 2 of family members I was walking to the grocery store with because they were saying hi to everybody. Oh, what's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, does it always take 30 minutes?
Walk 2 blocks.
Yeah. And she was like, yep. I'm just going to stay at the house.
Yeah, after a while, I just stopped going with family members to the grocery store because it would literally take me an hour to walk 2 blocks because they would run into all their friends and their, neighbors and stuff and talk about the latest things that are going on. There's like a really strong sense of community there.
It was great, though. It was like, I can already tell that Odale, one of the hosts that let us stay at the house, she was getting all dolled up and kind of ready. You can see in her attitude and bounce in her walk that she knew it was going to happen. And then Manuel, her boyfriend's like, oh my God, here she goes again with all of her friends. And then he keeps getting stopped and he talks for 20 minutes. Like, wow, all right.
Like when I'm trying to walk downtown.
But it's, yeah, exactly.
Hey, might be gone a week.
Can't take me anywhere.
They all look like, do you all know each other? Oh, okay, awesome. But it was a really great sense of community, and I think that's a really positive aspect that this blockade brought to Cuba, is that they had to connect and unite in order to even survive. And with that, they're all trusting of each other. You can come into your neighbor's home unannounced and be welcomed with coffee or water or fruit or something. And I, and really am in awe because I don't talk to my neighbors, and I grew up not talking to my neighbors. And even walking down the street or looking people in the eye, I'm trying to engage, and there's no connection there. So that's a huge cultural shock for me.
Totally.
Well, remember though, in Cuba, the way they've set up their society begins with looking at what is their most important asset, and that's their humans. And so they set up their society to be able to encourage and nurture the human potential. So that what does humans need? They need food, they need shelter, they need medical, they need art.
And I think that's where the root of their strength in the medical field really came from, is taking care of people. And when I was researching about Elam, one thing that really popped out was that they explained how their medicine is more of a hands-on treatment. You're more hands-on with your patients, and hey, let me help you down the stairs or something. A little different than what we do here.
Right.
Well, even their use of the stethoscope, I understand from doctors, that they use it so much more for diagnostic purposes, whereas in the United States, people go get some, machine to test them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the whole system, because it is so resource strapped, is much more about preventing problems
Right.
than dealing with them once they,
Yes.
happen. Like
Yes.
regular auto maintenance means your car doesn't break down, right?
Right.
But if you can't afford regular auto maintenance, you end up in the shop or in your crisis mode, and like, what am I going to do? There's a huge problem now, instead of just like
Right.
taking care of these little things. I mean, I know that's a key principle of the healthcare system,
Right.
is you do have a constant kind of regular checkups, right?
Right.
And oh, what's going on now? Oh, a little pain in my knee. Oh, maybe it's this. Like, there's actually a relationship where someone might be able to, like Nancy said, kind of diagnose something as a result of an interaction instead of an expensive medical test using a machine. And
That's because they're viewing it as a whole.
Right.
And it is. It's a community-focused kind of
Right. Even the body,
methodology.
though,
I mean,
their
certainly.
approach to medicine, which is what really
In the where?
stood out. Their approach to medicine
Yeah.
and how they look at the body. It's connecting the dots to the point where you're able to understand why something happened and explain that to somebody so they don't come in for the same problem, you know? And I think
Again
that
and
also
again
goes
and again.
Right, exactly. And it goes as far as the way that they view and approach problems in general, like their cars, for example. You know, you got to do with the best that you got. You don't really, you can't just go to the store and buy some more parts. With what money, you know, what resources.
That's why you see like a tractor engine in a 1950s Chevrolet,
Right.
Russian tractor engine in a 1950s Chevrolet.
Right.
It's just amazing how inventive and creative they are.
Agreed.
Right.
Mother, or necessity is the mother of all invention,
Right.
Ingenuity. We're running out of a little bit of time here, but Carol, I know you wanted to mention some of this stuff happening in Washington, D.C. coming up. I think we're all in agreement, you know, the travel ban needs to end, the blockade needs to end. How can people take steps to support this project? Carol, you mentioned you wanted to talk a little bit about what IFCO, Pastors for Peace is doing, as well as a whole bunch of other groups, many other organizations getting
Right.
involved in a whole weekend of advocacy, right?
Right,
You want
right.
to talk about that a little?
Yes. Pastors
Nancy
for
as well,
Peace-
if you want to chime
right.
in.
They are having people come to DC, and they will do an orientation to teach you about, quote, lobbying, unquote, to our legislators to end the embargo and the travel ban, and to educate those that are less knowledgeable and have a lot more misinformation about Cuba. And they've asked people to converge in Washington, D.C. on September the 16th, 17th, and 18th. And you can go to the Pastors for Peace or IFCO, IFCO websites, and you'll get the information about that. They're working on, Pastors for Peace is working on housing so that it won't cost very much. There is a bus coming from New York to take a bunch of people from New York to DC. And the days will be spent in going into the legislature, into our representatives' offices, and to talk to them about what's happening with the embargo, why it needs to be ended, and why the travel ban needs to be ended. And also the goal is to get the United States to give Guantanamo Bay back to the Cubans. But they're stressing right now in the blockade and in the travel ban. And basically the 2 days they'll be in the legislature talking to people, lobbying, and the third day they will have a cultural event. And yeah, so if you're interested,
You can check it out.
Yeah, you can go on their website and
IFCOnews.org.
right,
IFCOnews.org.
right,
Great. Thank you, Carol.
yeah.
We are almost out of time here, folks. So why don't we do a really quick closing statement, a little last message, anything last thing you want to say? No more than 30 seconds. I'm watching y'all. We'll start direct across.
Don't start with me. You started with me.
No,
before.
no, okay, fine. We started with you last time. We're going to start with Nancy.
Okay.
Really quickly.
One of my greatest experiences in Cuba was going to a baseball game. And that was just powerful. It was beautiful, the way the fans all interacted and fought with each other and argued. I loved it.
I'm planning on doing some report backs, and I'm planning on doing one on that weekend of September the 16th, 17th, 18th.
Great.
I haven't picked the date yet, but and I need to get my pictures together to do a report back with the pictures. So
Great. We'll be on the lookout for that.
right.
Drew?
I would just say go to Cuba, meet the people, and expose yourself to this beautiful culture because it's just an incredible experience. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, wonderful.
I would have to say live, love, celebrate, and connect like Cubans do. It's awesome and it's amazing and it feels you.
One of the things that really stood out to me in Cuba is how little development there is there and what an eco-paradise it is. And I think in all the, there's incredible music, there's incredible dancing, there's this incredible political experiment happening. It's easy to forget that it's also a really beautiful island. There's waterfalls and caves and wild rivers and jungle, and that's an aspect of Cuba that I don't think people talk about very often. So.
Well, so they don't all go there and mess it up.
It's because of
right,
the tight
but,
restrictions on corporations and industrialization. It's, that's why they have so much natural beauty there.
No, it's true. They do.
It's not an
very
accident.
carefully guard their natural resources. I haven't heard of a lot of fracking in Cuba yet.
Yeah.
Right.
Imagine that.
It'll come if they think it's there.
Well, certainly. Well, I think with that, folks, I want to thank everyone. Leonie, Sherman, thank you so much. Marissa, Ramirez, Drew Lewis, Carol Severson, and Nancy, Abbey. Really, y'all, a wonderful conversation. Hour flew by too short. I'm sorry we didn't get to check out any of your all's photos.
That was an hour?
Yeah, it was. Thank you all so much. On behalf of all of our wonderful folks here at Community Television, the crew, all the producers, our directors, everyone who helped make Voices from the Village happen, both now and then, beyond, much love, much respect as always to Charlie and Betsy Phillips for holding the torch down for so long. We got your back. We're going to keep the shows going. My name is Sandino Gomez. It's been a blast. I want to see you soon right here on Community Television's longest running public affairs talk show, Voices from the Village. Good luck. And good night. I had to steal Edward R. Murrow, I had to. That's, yeah.